They sent for her when she was still learning how to steady her voice. Not yet a woman, but not allowed to be a girl. She was told to smile more, to walk slower, to curtsy deeper, to swallow her opinions and speak in ribbons, soft, harmless, decorative. She watched her mother weep quietly when the letter came, and watched her stop just as quickly. There was no time for sorrow, only packing. She left behind her name, her language, her childhood, and boarded a carriage toward a destiny no one explained. Only one thing was clear. She was going to marry someone important, someone powerful, someone she'd never met. Her father looked proud. Her mother looked relieved. And the girl? She looked silent, not afraid, not eager, just aware that her life no longer belonged to her. The road stretched long, through forests that whispered things she didn't understand, past borders she didn't recognize. She practiced phrases in a foreign tongue while her maid combed her hair, practiced smiling while her stomach ached from motion and nerves, practiced obedience until it didn't feel like acting. When the palace gates opened, she was already someone else. Not the girl from the small house with the creaky door, but the future wife of a crown prince. The first time she saw him, he didn't look at her. Not really. He looked past her, over her head, as if she were furniture arranged for the occasion. He nodded once, and that was the beginning of their union. She was 14. He was colder than expected. He laughed at odd things. He flinched when touched. He mocked servants when he thought no one was listening. And worst of all, he didn't see her. Not even when she spoke. Not even when she tried. He saw the image of a dutiful wife. He didn't see the fire she had buried beneath layers of silk and obedience. That was his first mistake. The court whispered about her, that she was too eager, too clever, too foreign. She learned their customs, learned their gossip, learned to listen with her head tilted just enough to seem naive. But inside, she was drawing maps of who held power, of who wanted more, of who was pretending, and who was a threat. They called her pretty, they called her harmless, they called her a pawn, and she smiled, because pawns, they move first, they go unnoticed, and sometimes they reach the other side of the board. When the wedding came, it was grand. Gold laced into her bodice, diamonds in her hair. But her eyes weren't on the altar. They were on the men in attendance, the generals, the bishops, the guards who stood like statues. She watched them all, because she knew a crown is not given, it's built. One silence at a time, one alliance at a time, one quiet step closer to the throne. She bled on her wedding night and was praised for it, as if pain were a prize, as if sacrifice made her sacred. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She simply stared at the ceiling and memorized every crack in the plaster. Because that's what survival looked like. Stillness, patience, endurance. The prince grew crueler in private. He mocked her accent, laughed at her letters, dismissed her as decoration. But he forgot something. Decoration listens. Decoration remembers. And decoration does not stay in place forever. He thought her weak, but she was calculating. He thought her quiet, but she was watching. He thought her small, but he never noticed how quickly shadows stretch in candlelight. By 17, she had memorized the court. By 18, she had memorized him. He drank too much, spoke too freely, trusted no one, and yet, he underestimated the one person who watched him the most. His wife. She started writing at night, in the dark by candle, by instinct, recording what she heard, what she saw, what he said, not for gossip, for leverage, because queens don't always sit on thrones. Sometimes they wait. The people didn't love him. That much was clear. The court didn't trust him. That was clearer still. But they didn't speak it aloud. Not yet. Until one day, she did. Softly. To the right ears. In the right company. She didn't accuse. She wondered. Out loud. In innocence. With a furrowed brow and a careful tone. And just like that, the wind shifted. Not enough to topple the crown, but enough to notice which direction it might fall, and who might catch it. She started visiting churches, speaking to priests, donating discreetly to orphanages and soldiers' families. Not because she was pure, but because she understood optics, and because the people matter when you plan to rule them. She stood in front of soldiers and listened to their grievances, noted their names, memorized their leaders, because no coup begins with a queen. It begins with an army that chooses her. And soon she saw it in their eyes. Not fear, not pity, but faith. That maybe, just maybe, the girl who spoke their tongue, who remembered their sons, might wear the crown better than the man who ignored them. It was only a matter of time, and time was her specialty. Because you can only dismiss a woman so long before she becomes the one writing your history. She no longer blinked when the prince threw tantrums. She no longer reacted when he embarrassed her at court, or when he spilled wine on her dress just to test her patience. She had become unreadable. A polished surface that revealed nothing, but reflected everything. He didn't see it. How his sloppiness made her shine. How his cruelty sharpened her image. How his negligence sculpted her into something unforgettable. The people began to notice. She greeted commoners by name, stopped to speak to widows, laughed with children in the market, and she never spoke ill of her husband, never corrected him in public, never fought back where eyes could see. She didn't need to. The contrast did the work for her. In a court full of deception, she became the only one who never had to lie to gain favor. She used truth like a scalpel, quiet, precise, deadly. When the prince fell ill for 3 days, she ran the affairs of state. The ministers didn't resist. They obeyed. And when he recovered, something had changed. They looked to her first, paused when she didn't speak, waited for her nod before they agreed. The prince noticed, but he was too insecure to challenge her directly. So he sulked. Then he plotted. She pretended not to notice, even as rumors reached her ears of letters sent abroad, of whispers about foreign alliances, of papers drawn with signatures not yet dry. But she was always a step ahead. She reached out to the military quietly, met with generals in dim corridors, thanked them for their loyalty, reminded them who had remembered their needs when no one else had listened. She offered no threats, only memory, and they remembered. The prince, drunk on pride and paranoia, made one final mistake. He ordered her confinement, a room in the eastern wing, away from the council, away from her allies, away from the growing pulse of support that followed her like a shadow. He thought she would break, She smiled when the guards closed the door, because isolation is only a prison when you are forgotten. And she was unforgettable. Messages traveled faster than chains, and while she sat in silence, the kingdom stirred. Soldiers began to speak her name, advisors began to question his, and the people, they began to hope, not for a rebellion, but for a replacement, not with swords, but with certainty, that the crown had been misplaced, and it was time to return it to someone who deserved it. She was freed before the prince knew what had happened. They escorted him out of the palace like a guest overstaying his welcome. No bloodshed, no war, just the sound of boots on marble and silence in the halls he once ruled. She didn't watch him leave. She didn't need to. She stood at the window of her chamber, holding a letter she'd written days before, a proclamation, unsigned, waiting only for the moment. And now the moment had come. She dipped her pen in ink and wrote her name, the same name they had mocked for years. Too foreign, too delicate, too clever. Now it was written in bold script, stamped in wax, carried on horseback to every province. She didn't call herself Tsarina that day. She didn't need to, because the people did, and their voices carried farther than any coronation bell. She held her first council as ruler in silence for the first few minutes, letting the air fill with their uncertainty. Then she spoke, calm, precise, measured. Her voice echoed louder than any man's, not because she shouted, but because no one interrupted. When she finished, they applauded, not out of fear, but out of something rarer, respect. She began changing things immediately, reformed taxes, reopened universities, rewrote the laws that had once bound her hands, and every decision, every decree, every letter, carried the mark of someone who had known power from the outside looking in. She never forgot what it was like to be silenced, so she listened. She never forgot what it was like to be trapped, so she built schools, courts, hospitals, roads. They expected a queen. She became a revolution, not in banners or battles, but in policies, in permanence. She sat in meetings longer than anyone, read more than the men twice her age, wrote reforms with her own hand until her fingers ached. And when foreign diplomats arrived, they underestimated her, once, until she spoke in flawless French and corrected their proposals mid-sentence, with numbers, history, and precision. She never raised her voice, because power that raises its voice is announcing its insecurity. She had no need. Her presence spoke louder than declarations. They sent her diamonds. She sent them treaties. They sent her invitations. She sent them strategy. And soon, the world adjusted. Because empires don't shift by earthquake. They shift by accumulation of small wins, of quiet victories, of days where history forgets to take notes, but everything changes anyway. That's how she ruled, with elegance, with efficiency, with memory, and always, always, with the knowledge that her crown wasn't inherited, it was taken, earned, sharpened against the spine of every man who thought she was temporary. Because she wasn't just a ruler, she was a warning, a testament, a reminder that even pawns can rewrite the board. They once said she ruled like a man, but they were wrong. She ruled like a woman who had watched men fail. She ruled like someone who had been beaten for asking questions, and now asked the questions no one dared to answer. She ruled like someone who had been silenced for years, and now made silence a weapon, not a wound. She didn't march at the head of armies, but armies moved because of her. She didn't sit on thrones built for her. She reshaped the throne to fit her will. And those who thought they could mold her now studied her reforms as models for their own states. She became the symbol of something they couldn't quite name: power wrapped in velvet, steel veiled in diplomacy, a storm that never raised its voice. She wrote letters in the middle of the night, outlined strategies by candlelight, read maps, memorized regions, negotiated peace. While others slept, she prepared. She didn't build statues of herself. She built systems: education for girls, vaccinations for villages, trade routes that turned starving towns into thriving centers. And she did it while wearing silk, not to impress them, but to remind them that femininity and ferocity could coexist. She visited prisons, not out of pity, but policy. She questioned every sentence, reviewed every ledger, and where she found cruelty, she corrected it, not with mercy, with justice. She wasn't trying to be loved. She was trying to be effective. Because love fades, but legacy doesn't. And while her advisors whispered warnings, she listened with a calm that unnerved them. Because when you've survived betrayal, when you've smiled at men who plotted your confinement, no threat feels new. No scheme feels sharp enough to cut you anymore. She was no longer afraid of the blade. She had become the hand that wielded it. Foreign kings sent envoys to charm her. She danced with them at galas, dined with them under crystal chandeliers, let them speak first. But behind her smile, she calculated. She saw through their velvet lies, saw the treaties beneath their toasts, saw the land grabs behind their compliments. And she waited until the perfect moment to strike with ink, not iron. And when the world blinked, a border had shifted, an alliance had changed, a future had been rewritten by her, without battle, without bloodshed, with brilliance. She governed with the mind of a scholar and the heart of someone who once had nothing. And perhaps that's why she endured, because nothing makes you more dangerous than remembering what it was like to have no power at all. She outlived them all. The prince who mocked her, the nobles who dismissed her, the generals who doubted her, the women who whispered that she was too young, too foreign, too ambitious. She buried them with policies, with longevity, with a rule that stretched across decades like a silk banner carried by time itself. They named ships after her. Cities, fortresses, coins bore her profile. Schools taught her reforms. But none of that mattered to her. What mattered was this: that a girl, once locked in a room, now commanded the map on every diplomat's table. That a voice, once forced into silence, now echoed in law, in language, in legacy. That a crown, once denied to her, now rested upon her head, not as a symbol of inheritance, but as a symbol of conquest. Because she had not waited to be crowned, she had become the crown. Every time they tried to define her, she redefined the world around them. When they said she was too young, she ruled longer than any man of her line. When they said she was too weak, she survived coups, plots, betrayals. And when they said she didn't belong, she made the empire hers without shedding a drop of royal blood. Because she understood something they didn't: that true power is not taken in a moment. It's built, layer by layer, in patience, in observation, in memory. She kept her enemies close, closer than her friends. She let them whisper, let them underestimate her, let them plan. And then she used those very plans to tighten her hold. Every treaty she signed, every reform she passed, every palace she renovated, bore the weight of her intention. She wasn't just ruling, she was rewriting the definition of rule itself. She made the empire smarter, cleaner, more efficient. And slowly the old world fell away, replaced by a vision that came not from bloodline, but from brilliance. By the time the artists painted her final portrait, they didn't dare show her as delicate. They painted her with a scroll in one hand and the scepter in the other, cloaked in power, wreathed in legacy. Eyes sharp, not soft. And beneath that portrait, history finally wrote the name it had once tried to erase. Not a pawn, not a placeholder, not a pretty face for the court, but a ruler, a strategist, a force. The girl who came to court as a foreign bride and left the world as Catherine the Great. If her story moved you, speak her name below. Type "For the Crown" in the comments to let the world know we remember. And if you want more stories like this, where power is earned, not inherited, hit subscribe now, because the next queen is waiting behind the crown.